Um, Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive into the source material you sent over. Today, we're focusing on a figure whose name you might not see in mainstream headlines.
Hmm.
But his life's work completely revolutionized how we understand, study, and, well, ultimately try to save tropical forests.
Right.
We are looking at the career of Robin B. Foster. He's an American ecologist and botanist. And looking at the Wikipedia biographical article you provided, it is incredibly concise. At first glance, it almost reads like a densely packed resume of academic appointments and publication titles.
Yeah, it is a highly compressed summary, which, well, that's often the case with these types of overviews. It leaves a massive scientific footprint hidden just beneath the surface of the text.
And that is exactly our mission for you today. We're going to read between the lines of this impressive list of accomplishments. Because dedicating your entire life to the rainforest, it requires a unique kind of endurance.
It really does. And the central theme running through this biography is that Foster wasn't merely a scientist who went out and observed tropical forests. He is someone who fundamentally changed the methodology of how forests are measured, how they're mapped and understood on a global scale.
Which is huge.
It is. Before Foster and his collaborators came along, ecology had a markedly different approach to gathering baseline data in these environments.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to jump straight into a milestone from 1979 that the source describes with a very specific word. And that word is audacious.
Oh, yes. The 1979 project.
Right, so Foster's at the University of Chicago, and he's working on Barro, Colorado Island. He teams up with the frequent co-author Stephen P. Hubble. Together, they co-originate the Tropical Forest Dynamics plot. And their plan, this audacious plan, was to periodically map and measure every single tree within a 50-hectare plot.
Calling it audacious for the late 1970s is almost an understatement, honestly.
Just to frame that scale for you, 50 hectares is about 120 acres.
Right.
But rather than thinking about that in terms of, flat, empty space, think about the sheer biomass of a primary tropical forest.
Exactly. It's not a grassy field.
No. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of individual stems, everything ranging from massive canopy giants all the way down to the understory shrubs, and it's all tangled together in one of the most complex, hard-to-navigate terrains on Earth.
What's fascinating here is the massive paradigm shift this represents in the field of ecology.
How so?
Well, in a dense tropical rainforest, the traditional approach to managing that overwhelming volume of plant life was to sample a small, manageable area. Or perhaps you'd run a few narrow transects through the brush.
Like drawing a line and just counting what's near the line.
Precisely. You take your small sample and extrapolate those findings to guess what the rest of the forest is doing. But Foster and Hubble decided that to truly understand forest dynamics, how it lives, how it grows, competes, and eventually dies, you have to look at the entire neighborhood spatially.
You can't just guess based on a tiny fraction.
Right. You need to map exactly who is living next to whom over a massive area and track those specific individuals over time.
I just try to imagine the sheer logistics of that in 1979. I mean, imagine being a graduate student handed a clipboard and a roll of aluminum tags, standing at the edge of 120 acres of dense jungle, and being told to go map the exact coordinates and measure the diameter of every single tree.
It sounds impossible.
Where do you even begin?
You begin with an incredible amount of patience and a highly meticulous grid system. And that investment in time and labor paid off. Because this hyper-localized project on Barro Colorado Island, it didn't remain a one-off experiment.
It really didn't.
No, it became the blueprint. The source notes this led to a global network of 18 such tropical forest dynamics parcels. It created a standardized baseline.
So everyone started using their method.
Yes, because once you have 50 hectares mapped down to the last sapling, you can track the exact changes in that specific patch of Earth year after year. It provides a reliable long-term data set that simply didn't exist in tropical ecology before.
You can really see the scientific yield of that obsessive mapping when you look at the specific publications mentioned in the text.
The publications are very telling.
Yeah. There is a 1982 publication by Foster titled The Seasonal Rhythm of Fruitfall on Barro Colorado Island, and then a later paper from 1999 in the journal Science, co-authored with Hubble and S.T. O'Brien, titled Light Gap Disturbances, Recruitment Limitation, and Tree Diversity in a Neotropical Forest.
Those titles tell a compelling story about their methodology. Take the 1982 paper on the seasonal rhythm of fruitfall.
Mhm.
You can only confidently write about the seasonal rhythms of a highly diverse forest if you have been monitoring it continuously. You have to know the spatial distribution of the fruiting trees and track exactly when they drop their fruit, which requires the exact kind of comprehensive baseline map they built.
That makes total sense. And regarding that 1999 science paper on light gap disturbances and recruitment limitation, I actually want to pause on that. Because having that 50-hectare map completely changes how you can study something like a light gap.
Precisely. For those visualizing this, a light gap is what happens when a massive old tree finally falls over and rips a hole in the canopy overhead.
Suddenly, all this sunlight hits the dark forest floor.
Exactly. And because they had mapped the entire parcel beforehand, they knew exactly what was growing in that specific spot before the canopy tree fell.
Oh, wow.
And they could accurately track every single new piece of vegetation that sprouted up to fight for that newly available sunlight afterward.
Which ties directly into recruitment limitation, right?
Yes, it does. And for those highly familiar with the topic, recruitment limitation isn't just a broad term for where trees happen to grow. It specifically addresses the failure of a species to establish itself in a suitable habitat.
Why would it fail if the habitat is suitable?
Well, either because its seeds simply couldn't disperse to that specific light gap in time, or because the seedlings couldn't survive the initial brutal competition with everything else once they got there.
It's a race for the sun.
It is a literal race, and you cannot accurately study dispersal failure or competitive exclusion without a spatial map of where the parent trees are located and where the open niches appear. You need that 50-hectare map to answer those ecological questions with any sort of mathematical certainty.
But playing devil's advocate here,
Yeah.
as brilliant as this methodology is, it is incredibly slow. Gathering this data takes years, if not entire decades.
It's a generational commitment, really.
Yeah, and the reality of the environments Foster was working in brings up a much darker, more pressing side of his career. The text mentions his extensive fieldwork in Peru, and it casually drops the fact that he contracted both malaria and hepatitis.
It is a sobering detail that really anchors this academic biography in reality. Fieldwork in the Neotropics, especially back in the 70s and 80s, was brutal.
When you look at his time in Peru, you realize the physical toll of this profession. You weren't just reading books. You were dealing with vector-borne diseases, extreme humidity, and challenging logistics just to gather basic data.
It's dangerous work.
Yeah. Getting malaria and hepatitis isn't a minor occupational hazard. It is a severe, potentially life-altering reality of working in these remote ecosystems.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that physical reality makes his later career shifts incredibly significant.
How do you mean?
Well, he didn't just retreat to a safe laboratory or university desk after facing those illnesses. Instead, as a plant ecologist with Conservation International, Foster participated in what the text identifies as the first rapid assessment program.
Now, this is where the methodological friction really shows up for me. We just talked about the 50-hectare plot, a project defined by a slow, methodical, years-long approach to mapping. But suddenly, he is doing rapid assessments.
It's a massive pivot.
Right. How does a scientist trained to count every single leaf adapt to doing something rapidly? What data points do you have to sacrifice for the sake of speed?
That is the crucial trade-off in modern conservation. The text specifically notes these programs were created to inform urgent conservation decisions.
Urgent being the key word there.
Exactly. If an ecosystem in Peru is slated to be logged or cleared for mining next month, you do not have 10 years to map 50 hectares to prove the forest has ecological value.
You just don't have the time.
You don't. You have to sacrifice the granular, longitudinal data, the decades of tracking recruitment limitation in exchange for speed. You fly a team in, you spend a few weeks identifying proxy species, assessing overall biodiversity, and you generate immediate, actionable data to try and stop the bulldozers.
A great example from the source is his 1994 biological assessment of the Tambopada Reserve Zone in Peru, which he co-authored with Theodore A. Parker III.
Exactly. He had to take all that deep structural knowledge of how a forest works from his time on Barro Colorado Island and figure out how to apply it during what is essentially emergency triage.
It must be jarring to switch gears like that.
It requires an immense amount of expertise. You have to know which corners you can safely cut in a rapid assessment without compromising the scientific integrity of your findings.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It is incredible how he adapted to these rapid assessments in the 1990s, but to really understand where this lifelong obsession with forest dynamics came from, we actually have to look backward, at the very beginning of his academic journey.
Right, his educational roots.
Yes, the text outlines it clearly. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Dartmouth College in 1966, followed by a PhD in Botany and Plant Ecology from Duke University in 1974. He was working under the ecologist Dwight Billings.
And if you examine the title of his 1973 thesis from Duke, you see the foundation for his entire career.
The thesis was titled Seasonality of Fruit Production and Seed Fall in a Tropical Forest Ecosystem in Panama.
Notice the timeline there. 6 years before the 50-hectare mapping project began in 1979, and almost a decade before the 1982 paper on fruit fall rhythms, he was already drilling down into the specific dynamic cycles of fruit and seed dispersal.
He was already obsessed with the rhythm of the forest.
It reveals a remarkable consistency in his scientific curiosity. The thesis shows he was asking complex questions about the timing and rhythms of the forest canopy very early on.
But he couldn't answer them fully yet.
Right. To answer those questions comprehensively, he eventually realized he needed a much larger spatial data set. The 1973 thesis is really the intellectual origin point that inevitably led to the creation of the tropical forest dynamics plots.
And what stands out in this biography is that he didn't just hoard this methodology for his own papers. He was deeply invested in building infrastructure for the next generation of scientists.
He was a very active educator.
Yeah, the source notes he taught biology at the University of Chicago, served as a staff biologist at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, and was the doctoral advisor for Phyllis Coley.
Mentorship is how methodologies survive. By advising students like Coley, he ensured that the rigorous standards of both his slow mapping techniques and his rapid assessments propagated throughout the entire field.
But he also tackled one of the biggest bottlenecks in the field of botany directly. At the Field Museum of Natural History, he founded the Live Photos of Plants project and the Rapid Reference Collection.
Those are incredibly important.
They might sound like simple databases to someone outside the field, but the impact is massive, isn't it?
To appreciate the impact of those tools, you really have to think about how plant identification was traditionally done.
Okay, walk us through the old way.
Historically, if you found an unknown plant in the Neotropics, you had to collect a physical specimen, press it flat, dry it out, and then ship it to a major international herbarium, somewhere like Kew Gardens or the Smithsonian.
And then what? You wait.
You wait. Sometimes for months for an expert taxonomist to pull your dried, discolored specimen out of a box and compare it to their vast physical collection.
Which is an incredibly slow, resource-heavy process.
Exactly. It creates a massive bottleneck. And that bottleneck is unacceptable if you are trying to do a rapid assessment to save an area from immediate destruction.
Right, you can't wait 6 months for an identification if the logging starts next week.
Precisely. By creating the Live Photos of Plants project and the Rapid Reference Collection, Foster bypassed that century-old hurdle entirely. He took the forest out of the physical herbarium and digitized it.
Making it visual.
Yes. A rapid reference collection provides high-quality visual data that allows a researcher right there in the field to quickly identify a living, sterile plant, even if it doesn't currently have flowers or fruit to aid in the identification.
It democratizes the data. It means researchers, local conservationists, or students don't need access to an elite international herbarium to identify what is growing in their own backyard. It speeds up the entire conservation timeline.
And the scientific community clearly recognized the profound utility of that work.
They did. In 2013, Foster was elected an honorary fellow of the Association for Tropical Biology and Conservation, the ATBC. And later, in 2017, he received the 15th Cuatro Medal.
Those are significant honors.
They represent a consensus from his peers that his work fundamentally shaped modern tropical biology.
Receiving an honorary fellowship from the ATBC is an acknowledgement that your methodologies haven't just contributed to the field, they have literally become the infrastructure upon which the field operates.
So what does this all mean? When we look closely at this dense Wikipedia article, we are really looking at a scientist defined by an incredible methodological duality.
A duality of time, really.
Exactly. On one hand, Robin B. Foster is the researcher with the staggering patience to draw a box around 120 acres of dense jungle and painstakingly map hundreds of thousands of individual stems over decades.
The slow approach.
Yes. But on the other hand, he is the conservationist who recognized the immediate threat to these ecosystems, pushing into Peru to conduct rapid assessments and generate actionable data before a forest could be cleared.
And that duality is why you, the listener, should care about this material. Foster's career laid the essential groundwork for how the global community currently monitors the health, diversity, and survival of tropical ecosystems.
It's the baseline for everything.
It is. The methodologies he helped establish, from the 18 global forest dynamics parcels to the rapid reference collections, these are the tools we still use today to take the ecological pulse of the planet.
It is a phenomenal legacy, just stretching from a single thesis on falling seeds to an entire global network of data.
It truly is. And analyzing this tension in his career between the slow, methodical mapping and the urgent, rapid assessments, this raises an important question for you to consider.
I'd love to hear it.
Based purely on the methodological shifts we've discussed today, how do modern scientists balance the absolute gold standard of slow, comprehensive ecological observation with the pressing, immediate need to make urgent conservation decisions before those very ecosystems disappear completely?
That is a brilliant question to end on, and a perfect thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. It is a balancing act that defines the front line of modern conservation.
It really does.
Thank you so much for sending over this source material and joining us as we unpack the remarkable career of Robin B. Foster. We hope you walk away with a deeper understanding of the meticulous work required to measure our world's forests. Thanks for listening, and take care.